Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics presentation, Projected Impact of New Division I Revenue in 2030 and Beyond. I am Michael Cross, and I have the pleasure of serving on the Knight Commission's consulting team, and I will serve as your moderator today. We have a great deal of information to share, and we plan to leave significant time for questions and discussions later in the session. If you're participating virtually and would like to ask questions during the discussion session, you are welcome to submit questions at any time by using the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. To orient you about what we plan to cover in the next 30 minutes before opening things up for questions, we will share a brief background about the Knight Commission and the current state of college athletics. You will then hear about the finances of Division I, examining the primary revenue sources across FBS, FCS, and basketball-centric institutions, before looking specifically at financial projections of business as usual spending that will allow an influx of billions in new CFP revenue. And finally, we will share with you solutions to better align these revenues with the values and principles of college sports. Now I would like to introduce Peter Roby to kick off the presentation. Peter serves as the advisor to the Director of Athletics at Dartmouth College and is a member of the Knight Commission. Peter previously served as Director of Athletics and Recreation at both Northeastern University and at Dartmouth, his alma mater. Peter?
Thank you, Michael. Thanks to everybody for joining us today, both virtually and in person. From its inception, the Knight Commission's work has been driven by values. Our purpose is to lead transformational change, to prioritize the education, health, safety, and success of college athletes. During this pivotal time in collegiate athletics, values-based transformational change is exactly what is needed. As an independent organization, the Knight Commission engages experts and conducts research to inform our diverse membership of thought leaders. Our co-chairs include former U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, former NBA and college basketball star and attorney Len Elmore, and Vice President and General Counsel at Duke University, Pamela Bernard. And like myself, 2/3 of our commission members were college athletes. We do not pretend to have all the answers or the perfect solutions. Our legacy has been to provide thorough research and careful thought to concepts, principles, and ideas that can lead to effective policy. The Commission's inaugural report led academic reforms in college athletics, resulting in an academic threshold for postseason eligibility and embedding academic incentives in the distributions of both the NCAA and the college football playoff. These reforms were major factors in the record high graduation rates Division I athletes experience today. There's no doubt that we are in one of the most pivotal periods in college sports history. As you all are aware, in June of 2021, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled against the NCAA in the NCAA versus Alston case, a ruling that prohibits the NCAA from creating any national rules to limit the educational benefits schools can provide. The second major change involved new state laws and NCAA rules allowing college athletes to earn money from third parties for the use of their name, image, and likeness. The third major area impacting college sports is the explosion in the conference media rights, which are determined in large part by FBS football and has influenced recent conference realignments and the influx of new revenues from the CFP. More recently, the NCAA's Transformation Committee recommended new D1 standards that will require institutions to provide more athlete benefits. And finally, there are several major judicial and/or administrative rulings that could lead to college athletes being considered employees. In addition to this potential major change, there continues to be looming litigation that could have significant financial consequences. I'd like to now turn things over to Chief Executive Officer of the Knight Commission, Amy Perko. Amy?
Thank you, Peter, and thanks again for being here. The slide Peter reviewed highlights what we've been experiencing and what I've termed the dog years of college sports. So it's 14 years worth of changes in 2 years, and more changes ahead. The next series of slides will examine the current as well as the future projections of the Division I financial landscape. This is important background to understanding additional projections as well as the solutions we will offer. The data were sourced from the Knight Newhouse College Athletics database, which organizes data reported by Division I public institutions on their NCAA financial reports. And you can access this database at knightnewhousedata.org. This slide shows the major difference in the sources of revenues for schools in the Power 5 conferences compared to all other Division I schools. From left to right, you can see here Division I FBS autonomy or the Power 5 schools, FBS Group of 5 schools, FCS, and schools with no football. The sources of revenue as a percentage of revenue are depicted in different colors. The Power 5 FBS schools have a very different revenue profile, as you know. Their major sources of revenue are from conference and NCAA distributions through media rights deals and postseason football, shown in blue, donor contributions, shown in green, and ticket sales in purple. Less than 3% of the total athletics revenue comes from institutional and government support and from student fees. The most important point on this slide is the schools outside the Power 5, including the FBS Group of 5, rely heavily on institutional and government support, seen in the burgundy color, and student fees shown in orange. All three subdivisions rely heavily on these two sources for more than 2/3 of their athletics revenue. The revenue sources for Power 5 are significantly different than the rest of Division I. And for the non-Power 5 schools, this profile raises questions about how to fund new Division I mandates, as well as implications of a potential athlete-employee model. With this slide and others you will see, we are highlighting important differences that have far-reaching implications. Turning to the two biggest revenue generators in college sports, March Madness and the College Football Playoff. I think as everyone in this group knows, the NCAA manages the March Madness tournaments as referenced on the left side of this slide. The Division I tournament media agreement generates more than $1 billion annually, providing the primary source of revenue for all three divisions' national operating costs, and the NCAA distributes more than $600 million annually to more than 350 Division I schools. These revenues are also used to cover all national operating expenses for FBS football, such as catastrophic insurance and legal fees, even though the NCAA receives zero in revenue from the CFP or FBS football generally. The right side of this slide depicts the CFP administration. The CFP is an LLC managed by FBS conferences, totally independent of the NCAA. This event generates more than $600 million annually for those 10 conferences to share with their institutions. With expansion, the CFP is projected to generate $2 billion in annual revenue, and there is no plan for that revenue to cover the national cost for FBS football that are currently absorbed by the NCAA. Currently, the amount of revenue distributed through March Madness and the CFP are similar, as you can see in this slide. March Madness distributes more than $600 million to 350 Division I, more than 350 Division I members, and 76% of that distribution is unrestricted for schools to use however they choose. The CFP distributes $567 million for the 133 schools in the FBS, and as you can see there, that can be used. There's no portion that is restricted on any kind of use, so schools can use it however they choose. The expansion of the CFP will have a major impact on college sports, and planning for that impact should begin now. It is estimated that by 2027, the CFP will generate $2 billion annually, double the amount of the NCAA budget. With no accountability to require any of those funds to cover national costs associating with operating the FBS, the CFP distribution to FBS schools will likely be more than 4 times greater than the NCAA Division I distribution. So to further underscore the dramatic impact of FBS football on the revenues at Power 5 schools and the changes over the past couple decades, this slide looks at the relationship between two revenue sources: conference media contracts and CFP revenues shown in blue, and NCAA distributions shown in red. In 2005, the NCAA distribution, again represented by the red cylinder, was 20% of the total shared revenue for Power 5 schools. In 2019, 4 years after the first CFP championship, the total conference media contract and CFP revenue exploded to nearly $2.7 billion, resulting in NCAA distributions contributing only 8% of that total shared revenue. Using publicly available information about the financial growth from conference media contracts and the CFP 12-team expansion, projections were calculated for 2030. Total revenues from these two sources are expected to skyrocket to more than $6 billion in 2030, and NCAA distributions become an increasingly small part of the revenue source, around 5%. After studying the financial landscape just outlined and recognizing that the FBS schools will begin receiving an additional $1.4 billion from the expanded CFP playoff, the Knight Commission hired financial services firm CliftonLarsonAllen, known as CLA, to develop projections about the potential impacts of this influx of money. The Knight Commission's Managing Director for Strategic Initiatives, Sandy Hatfield-Clubb, will share those results with you.
Thank you, Amy. CLA conducted an assessment of historical trends of actual operating expenses across FBS public institutions. The data were pulled from the Knight Newhouse College Athletics database for fiscal years 2005 to 2022. CLA evaluated growth trends for different periods of time to identify the best approach to understanding the impact of CFP revenues on expenses and also to mitigate the effects of COVID. The decision was made to use fiscal years 2015 through 2022 to include the largest amount of data available to project growth. This data set captures the inaugural CFP revenues as well as the down spending years of COVID, which was an anomaly. The growth trends selected resulted in more conservative projections. If you'd like to see the alternative growth projections, we can show those during the discussion points at the end. The compound growth trends you will see in this presentation are based upon fiscal years 2015 through 2022. CLA ran projections across a number of categories and provided a significant number of ways to analyze the data. We will focus on only two of them in this particular presentation to provide an impactful data point that highlights the problem with the business as usual approach to the future of college sports. The first category is expenses for all athletes across all sports at public FBS schools. These expenses include all components of athletic scholarship, which, as you know, includes housing, meals, in addition to tuition and fees. These expenses also include the cost of attendance stipends, as well as medical expenses and medical insurance premiums. The second category is football coaching salaries and benefits for 11 countable coaches at each FBS public institution. This category includes coaches' compensation, bonuses, and all related benefits that are part of the institution's contract, whether or not that is provided by the institution or paid by a third party. CLA created this graph to demonstrate the trajectory of the athlete expenses relative to football coaching compensation at FBS Power 5 public institutions. This analysis focuses on the Power 5 with the assumption that without changes, these schools will continue to receive 80% of all CFP revenues as they have done in the past. The projections begin with fiscal year 2023 and show that 10 years later, The nearly $1.4 billion projected for annual football coaching compensation for 11 coaches at each school nearly reaches the expense line with a difference of only $9 million. CLA applied what we believe is the fairest approach to using compound growth rates for 2015 through 2022 for this projection. As mentioned, other reasonable growth rates were considered, and these projections resulted in football coaching expenses crossing over and exceeding the spending on athlete expenses at a much earlier time frame. To summarize our last point, the CLA projections demonstrate that public FBS Power 5 schools will spend almost as much on the compensation and benefits for 594 head and assistant football coaches as they do for athletic scholarships, cost of attendance stipends, and medical expenses and benefits for more than 30,000 athletes across the same 54 public universities. A more granular look at the SEC and the ACC demonstrates that there are significant differences among Power 5 conferences. The projections for the SEC on the left show their football coaching compensation and benefits crossing over the spending on athlete scholarship and medical expenses and medical benefits line in 2028. While projections for the ACC on the right show the same two expense lines, with the ACC schools spending significantly more on athlete benefits than on the compensation of 11 football coaches. Further highlighting the difference in these spending practices among Power 5 schools, the CLA analysis revealed in FY 2022, 9 of the 51 Power 5 public schools already spend more than 11 football coaches than they spend on their athletes, scholarships, cost of attendance, medical expenses, and insurance benefit for all of their athletes. CLA's projection for 2032 is that 25 of the 54 public schools in the Power 5 will have reached the same crossover point. Now I will turn it back over to Amy Perko, who will turn our focus to the solutions that will prioritize the education, health, safety, equity, and success of college athletes.
Thanks, Sandy. And I want to remind the folks who are joining us via Zoom, if you have questions about any of this material, including the projections Sandy just reviewed, you can put those questions now in the Q&A. And for those of you here, we will have a Q&A after the presentation. So also want to highlight that with the model that we've CLA produced, we have that by conference, by institution. For those of you who are in the FBS, we're glad to sit down and share these projections and modeling with you. So now turning to solutions. You know, if college athletics is committed to the education, health, safety, and success of college athletes in a financial model that reflects these priorities, these projections should be very concerning. The projections, bottom line, just show a model that is really moving out of whack. Since 2019, the Knight Commission has been aggressively studying the finances and issues of college sports and designed a series of solutions to change the course and direct more of the increasing revenues to college athletes' education, health, safety, and success, and equity across the board. The first series of solutions were introduced in a 2020 report, Transforming the D1 Model. And as you know, the NCAA recently adopted solutions proposed by its own transformation committee that aims to increase athlete benefits. This recently approved NCAA holistic student-athlete model requires Division I schools to provide greater investments in athlete support, like financial assistance through degree completion and other increased support, particularly in health and safety. Our commission believes this is a great start, and these new commitments are consistent with the priorities we've championed to align resources with the core mission. The next series of slides will highlight the Knight Commission solutions in 3 key areas that we believe even more proactively address the influx of billions of dollars into the college sports system and boost the effort to better align structures, incentives, and resources with the principles and core mission. This is the roadmap: alignment, incentives, and the use of money. The first key area is with alignment, aligning the structures of college sports with its governance, responsibilities, and financial accountability. A second solution is to change incentives through the existing revenue distribution structures and align them with the NCAA's constitutional principles. And finally, there should be accountability to ensure that the money is used primarily for the education, health, safety, and equity and well-being of college athletes. First, the financial structure and the governance of college sports must be aligned. The Knight Commission offers two different options to address the current misalignment between the roles and responsibilities of the CFP, the NCAA, and the FBS football revenues. These options will resolve the current fragmented authority and address the national operating cost currently absorbed by the NCAA. This slide outlines option one solution. In December of 2020, our commission recommended a new and separate governing structure for the sport of FBS football, dubbed the National College Football Association, seen on the left side of this slide. This entity would govern competition for and generate and distribute revenue from FBS football. The NCAA would continue to govern competition for and generate and distribute revenue from all sports other than FBS football. This option, with a different and unified governing structure for FBS football, has growing support from FBS athletic directors. Also, in order to combat the self-interest that dominates the competitive nature of college sports and governance decisions, it's critical, we believe, to provide objective oversight. The Knight Commission has long championed the importance of adding independent directors to all governing boards. So you can see the independent directors highlighted in this slide. And again, this is an improvement in governance that we think the Division I board should take action on now, as well as the CFP Board of Managers, to add independent directors. We offer a second option as a minimum solution to align financial accountability within the current system through two actions. And this solution assumes that there will not be a new governing entity for football and that the NCAA will continue to be the singular governing structure for all sports. So the first action focuses on aligning CFP revenues with national expenses for the sport of football. If CFP revenues funded the national expenses to operate FBS football, including the cost for enforcement, insurance, and litigation, that would free up expenses currently funded by the NCAA March Madness revenues of an amount estimated by Lead One of more than $60 million. This money would be reallocated across all Division I, and in particular to help those schools fund new division membership mandates and programs. Additionally, the NCAA revenue distribution formula should change to be consistent with current NCAA bylaws that state only NCAA championship sports are counted in the NCAA distribution. This would exclude FBS football factors from the formula, since the CFP hosts the national championship event and makes decisions on all shared CFP revenue for the sport of FBS football. So this simple change would result in more than $61 million becoming available for redistribution annually to Division I members, increasing money to non-FBS schools. In fact, it's estimated that each non-FBS school would receive more than $100,000 in annual distributions from this change alone. It is our view that these two changes in the NCAA revenue distribution formula should have been made in 2015, when FBS football launched a national championship with a revenue distribution system that was separate from the NCAA. And those two changes could result in a combined $120 million benefit to the NCAA for redistribution annually. Our full 2020 report and detailed analysis about this concept is on our website, knightcommission.org. So moving to the second set of solutions, incentives for existing principals. Again, this second set just emphasizes and is grounded in that value of changing the incentive structure to align with principles. Specifically, NCAA incentives through shared revenue distribution should align with the NCAA constitutional principles, included the stated areas of diversity and gender equity. Our commission believes that any financial incentives a national governing entity awards for athletic success must reward for the performance of men's and women's teams. The NCAA should address the current gender discrimination in their current revenue distribution formula that awards only for men's basketball success in its championship tournament. The Kaplan-Hecker report that was commissioned, which was a gender equity report, and it was commissioned by the NCAA Board of Governors, also recommended actions to address these gender inequities in the revenue distribution more than 2 years ago, and this issue remains unresolved. College sports can also do more to close racial equity gaps and create more equitable pathways for Black college athletes during and after college. Independent research we commissioned found that there are Division I schools receiving financial incentives through the NCAA's academic performance program that have more than a 25 percentage point gap between the graduation success rates of their white and Black athletes. As a result, last May, the Knight Commission proposed a new racial equity standard be used as a filter before schools can receive those academic incentives through that program. This recommendation was positively received by the Committee on Academics, but they deferred any action due to the Transformation Committee work. Given that that work is now concluded, we do expect this issue to be reconsidered. And finally, in order to incentivize athlete opportunities, we believe a new sports sponsorship category within the NCAA's formula should be created that would provide escalating rewards to schools that sponsor more than a median number of sports in Division I. Again, this approach would reward the core value of opportunity, allowing more athletes to compete and earn degrees, and rewarding schools that are investing those monies in providing those athlete opportunities. The final area where we believe changes are needed to proactively address the influx of billions of dollars is the critical area of how the money is used and how that money is aligned, how that spending is aligned with core values. The Knight Commission's report, Connecting Athletic Revenues with the Educational Model of College Sports, fittingly dubbed the CARE model, was released in September of 2021. It requires that shared revenues are tethered directly to the educational purpose, with a special emphasis on the core principles of transparency, independent oversight, gender equity, broad-based athletic opportunities, and financial responsibility. This in-depth report lays out a conference-based approach to provide greater accountability for the spending of shared athletic revenues toward education-centric priorities. Within the CARE model report, you will find examples of bold and innovative conference-based approaches that conferences can take to regulate total expenses, which could include total coaching salaries. Each of the Knight Commission solutions offered today have been well researched, and most importantly, are grounded in the principles and values of college sports. All of the items we've reviewed here can be found on our website, as I've mentioned before, knightcommission.org. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Peter Roby for some final takeaways and closing comments before we take your questions.
Thanks, Amy. The Knight Commission is motivated by an education-centric, values-based approach to college athletics that focuses on the best interests of student athletes at every level of the NCAA. On behalf of my fellow members of the Knight Commission, I want to acknowledge that Division I leaders are working through complex issues. And in presenting data projections, we are certainly not trying to pick on FBS or the Power Five. The many Power Five leaders that I know in the business share principled values grounded in higher education. But we must align espoused values with our behavior. That said, the current and potential future financial landscape we shared with you today is real. There are billions of dollars on the horizon that will benefit a very small group in Division I. The NCAA Board of Governors changed the Constitution to allow the three divisions more autonomy to respond to modern issues. Division I can and should take serious look at the implementing solutions so the business as usual approach doesn't lead to more schools spending more on 11 football coaches than on all of the direct educational and medical care benefits for all the athletes across all sports on campus. More money being spent on 11 coaches on 55 campuses than all 30,000 athletes receiving aid. Let that sink in. If you're a legislator, if you're a congressman, are you looking to give people relief if that's the way they're doing their business? We've got the constitutional changes at our disposal to make those changes now. How we distribute the money, the values that we espouse, what we prioritize. Nothing stopping us in Division I from doing that. So I want to make it as real for you as I can. When I was at Northeastern, we sponsored men's rowing. Men's rowing is not a sponsored sport for the NCAA. We had over 80 athletes probably that were participating in men's rowing. Many of them were receiving some sort of financial aid. We got no credit for that. None. Why didn't we get credit for that? Because it's not a sponsored sport. Yet FBS football gets credit in the distribution equation for sponsoring all those scholarship athletes, but their championship is not sponsored by the NCAA. Values-driven leadership, alignment between values and behavior. That's what we've been espousing. There are billions of dollars on the horizon that will benefit a very small group in Division I. And so finally, we also want to recognize that a congressional solution may well be needed to protect college sports, particularly a uniform approach to NIL compensation and contracts. However, the Knight Commission believes strongly that college sports leaders must create a plan that will correct inequalities, inequities of the past and more closely align the structure of college sports with its governance, incentivizes existing principles through shared revenue distribution, and clearly focuses the use of money on the education, health, safety, equity, and well-being of college athletes. I'll turn it back over to Michael Cross so that we can answer some of your questions and facilitate a deeper discussion. Thank you all for being here again.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to the other panelists for the informative presentation, and I hope everybody here found it interesting and informative as well. As we open up for questions, in addition to the three panelists who presented, we're joined by Todd Turner, who's a three-time Power 5 athletic director. We're also joined virtually by the researchers from CLA to participate in the question and answer session. The three representatives are accountants and analytics experts who created the projections that you saw here and conducted the analyses that we shared. Those three individuals are Matthew Borchert, who's a principal in data analytics, Leah Lindstrom, manager of higher education, and Nikhil Kumtha, who is the director of CLA in Washington, D.C. To the audience, we would like to now hear your feedback and take questions both about the attendees here as well as our virtual guests. You can direct your questions to any of our presenters or to the CLA representatives who are available via Zoom. If you're participating virtually, utilizing the Q&A function will be the best way to go about this. And for the people here in the room, if you can use the microphone in the center of the room so that the people on Zoom can hear what's being asked. And please share your name and affiliation when asking your questions. So we'll open it up here and hopefully get a robust discussion going. I know we're robust out in the virtual world, so Sandy, take
So-
it out there.
Our first question from Todd Petter. I wonder if you looked at all coaching expenses, not just football. It seems that a better apples to apples comparison, if your comparator is expenses for all student athletes, it would be more descriptive of the true difference between student athlete versus coaching expenses. Was there a reason for that decision? You want-
Sure, I'll start. And we will be releasing a report, and it will have more data than what we presented today. And we tried to really show the points that stood out as being, a very obvious symptom of a model that needs correction. We did look at all coaches' salaries, and we have graphs that will be in our report on the non-football coaches' salaries. The difference there, as you know, is every institution, it really differs in terms of how many non-football coaches you have on campus because of the difference in the number of sports. And this particular look that we focused on is a more obvious one to say, it's identified 11 countable coaches and what that shows compared to all athletes on campus.
Can I just add to that?
Mhm.
The other thing about that strikes me is that we're not having litigation and Supreme Court findings and all that sort of stuff. We're not having lawsuits and stuff. We're not having kids that want to be seen as employees based on a volleyball team, based on a softball team. I mean, the issues that got us to where we are is the escalation around money, and that money has been driven by football. And so we wanted to make sure that we could show what the current trends are and what the future might look like if the spending continues to get out of control, because there's so much more money coming into the coffers. There's not a lot more money coming into the coffers for all the other sports sans football. It's the football money.
Let me also add to that, and I'll ask, I think, Jojo, maybe you can cue up the severance pay slide. In all the data that CLA reviewed, and again, this is looking at historical data from what institutions have reported, there's a clear demarcation beginning in 2015 when the college football playoff began, that the data show that the money that flowed in from the CFP beginning in 2015 disproportionately flowed to football coaches' salaries and, in fact, football coaches' severance pay. And we have a graph where you can see that. And so again, so you can see this, it shows 2015 is marked in blue when the college football playoff begins. And you can kind of see a 3-year pattern of coaches being given a number of years and then being let go. And so this is actual data in 2015, the severance pay, for football, FBS football coaches paid to a handful of staffs fired then was what, 32 million. And then last year, fiscal year 2022, it was 98 million. So again, moving forward, we also have projections on what severance is going to potentially look like if those trends continue. And it's ridiculous. And so our point is there's $2 billion coming in CFP revenues. So that's an opportunity. Anytime any complicated organization gets new revenue, that's the time to make changes. So before all this new revenue comes into the system, now's the time to correct the misalignments of the past. And one of those key misalignments is very simple: CFP money being used to pay for FBS football national operating costs and fixing the revenue distribution system for all of Division I, because the CFP, frankly, is FBS football's revenue distribution system. So that's a key part of all this in terms of now's the opportunity before that revenue comes in. And NCAA staff members can tell you, it was pointed out earlier that one of our, signature or legacy recommendations was to embed academic incentives in the NCAA distribution. And that was something we pushed for a long time. And NCAA staffers can tell you the best time for the NCAA and those on the committee to be able to do that was when the NCAA extended its contract and had new revenues coming in. So that's really why it happened. It wasn't a magic moment. The magic moment was in 2016. That's when it was obvious there would be new money coming into the system, and that's why it changed. And so that's why the timing of this information and decision makers talking about it is so critically important, because the CFP revenues will be in the system before we know it. And so now's the time to deal with that.
So I'm going to encourage, we got a lot of smart people in the room. Hopefully we'll get somebody to go to the microphone. That'll be great. Feel free. If you're ready, we'll queue it up. We'll go to the virtual, your choice.
If you're ready, I'll ask a question. Dan Butterly, the Commissioner of the
Please do.
Big West. So the Night Commission puts forth excellent arguments and excellent presentation. I appreciate that. The question comes down to, where do you anticipate this change to take effect? How does this change get made? Understanding that the governance process within the NCAA is controlled by the college football playoff conferences, the FBS conferences, particularly with weighted vote, with full representation on such things as the Division I Board of Directors and NCAA Council. So obviously the Night Commission continues to put forth great stats and great feedback and great direction, but the changes don't seem to happen. So what is your recommendation, knowing the current representation with the NCAA is amazingly based upon CFP football or FBS football, even though those revenues don't come in? How do you anticipate that change should be pushed through the system?
No, great question. And it is, we've made several changes related to revenue distribution. It's our understanding that the NCAA board charged the board's Committee on Finance to look at revenue distribution and to make recommendations to the board. I think those were more focused on how that NCAA formula and whether or not, how to address gender equity within the formula, but kind of the broader changes that we're talking about as well, we think should be part of that Committee on Finance's charge. So I would encourage everyone here, if you think what we've presented makes sense, to look at the membership of that Committee on Finances of the board. I think it's about 8 members. We have the list, and it's like anything else of making change, just to send them a note, talk to them if you know them, and say, we hope you're going to give attention to this. We are doing that on our own, and we've had a couple we've already met with who listen to and understand, and there are parts, that I think they're supportive of the committee looking at that. So again, just reiterating to the leaders who are sitting on the board the importance of the timing of all this.
Amy, may I add a comment? In my 47 years of working in the college space, I've got this gray hair.
You started at 16.
I was 5. The decision makers are the presidents. And when you look at college football management board, it's 10 college presidents that are sitting in there, and they have the authority to change the distribution formula in any way that they wish. And so, I think we really have to emphasize to that group the principles upon which they're supposed to be acting. And, it's the membership that would ask those presidents to have courage and do the right thing and do the right thing for our students. So that's really, I think and that's one of the reasons that the Night Commission has been so consistent on independent directors, that don't have a personal stake in their conference or in their school, and they can fall back on those principles and do it with integrity.
So, and those of you who are not FBS who are here in Division I, Dan, we understand what you said in terms of the weighted voting, but we think those 2 issues that Todd highlighted, independent directors, and then the opportunity that Committee on Finances does have, are really ones that every member of the Division I board should understand the reasoning behind them.
We're going to go back to the internet here. Oh, we got one in person. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, everyone. Stu Sutton here, Wisconsin Athletics. Question about, you may have covered this in previous, presentation before, but runaway coaches' salaries. Obviously there's a path where you could do a competitive base salary, like Wall Street executives, 500,000 base salary, and then it's performance based. So you can get to 2 million, 4 million if you win your league, if you win your conference. It's going to take a strong president and athletic director to make that call, but that could start creating some change. But it's going to take a strong president and AD to say, the head football coach is going to be paid 500,000. You're going to have a chance to make 4 million. But it's going to be performance based, and maybe rather than a 5-year contract, it's a 1-year contract. And I know, collusion, and if everyone did it all at once, there would be lawsuits, but I think we need to get to somewhere where it's a competitive based salary, but it's got to be performance based. But that's a potential recommendation. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll just jump in on that. Our care model that I referenced, we do offer, some examples of conference-based approaches that, would not violate antitrust law because it'd be a conference-based approach. But the overall approach of requiring each conference to have some kind of financial responsibility plan. And there are ways that conferences even today could, regulate expenses and include, this coaching salaries into those targeted expenses and provide incentives to schools that stay within a certain range. It's just like the professional sports luxury tax system. If you exceed it, you pay a penalty. You could look at the other side of having targeted ranges that more incentives of the shared revenues flow to those schools that stay within the targeted range. We had a president say to us, well, one principle could be if you're a school where your 11 football coaches are paid more than what you're spending on all those on campus, then you don't get a certain distribution from the conference based on that. I'd also say with your particular example, we had a university system CFO say to us that he used to have to sign off on all system contracts of coaches in their system. And he was so embarrassed by it, he had the rule change that he didn't have to sign off on it. And he said exactly what you're saying. He said, we need to go to a system where the incentives are outrageous, but that's what's then it maybe make people uncomfortable, but more of the big money needs to be put in the incentives.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ursula Gurney. I'm the Deputy Athletics Director in SWA at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. I'm also the past president of NACDA's academic affiliate N4A and a former member on the Committee on Academics. I just have a question that's more at the ground level for academics, because hopefully the focus stays on the graduation of our student athletes. So whether the flow of money changes or doesn't change, hopefully we're still going to be graduating student athletes. So what is your advice for those who are working with student athletes towards graduation? Those of us who are making policy or members of the Committee on Academics who struggle just with some of the basic things, such as legislation that continues to be driven, that runs counter to academics. I'm thinking right now, one of the pieces is the potential of basketball being played next summer. So just what is just the some of these pieces that are solely focused on academics, the guidance or suggestions you would give to the personnel working with them?
Thanks for the question, Ursula, and for all the work that you've done in those areas. We talk about this a lot in the Pathway program that I help to consult with for the NCAA and leadership development, and the cohort that goes through it. Is that given all the noise that's in the system around money and the idea of employee status and all that sort of stuff, and all of us that work with students on a daily basis, we have to make sure that we remain focused on doing what's in their best interest and prioritizing their education and their development. And we can't blink when it comes to that. We have to hold them accountable for getting a quality education for as long as they're in our institution. We can't do anything. We can't control what they do once they leave us. But while they're with us, we have to have a singular focus on doing what's in their best interest, making sure that they're treated respectfully, that they have a voice, that they learn how to advocate for themselves, and they develop their critical thinking skills, and they get a quality education. We make that a priority, and that everybody that works with us is doing the same thing. And so whether they transfer or not, the best way for us to limit whether they feel like they have to transfer or not is to treat them as well as we can treat them. Treat them like an adult, like a human being. Give them a voice, show them respect. And that's always been my philosophy as a leader in college athletics. And that's what I try to communicate to anybody that's aspiring to lead in this business. We have to make sure that we don't get distracted. We can't get distracted.
Before we go, oh, please.
So my name is Will Cowan. I actually run an NIL collective at Florida State. So sorry if I'm the evil one in the room. But in looking at the first two slides, the first one talked about revenue distribution, and clearly the TV money, we know where the money is. What we're doing at our level is relatively unsustainable. I think we all know that with NIL. The amount of money, just to put it in perspective, that goes out at a place like ours is comparable to what we bring in from Learfield. So there's no other category on that graph where we can find that much money consistently. So the question for the committee, is there a pathway to the next slide was football coaches versus students. Is there a pathway without unionization that I don't think any of us want to go there? Is there a pathway for this revenue to find its way to the students through the school as ambassadors, which they are? Our quarterback comes back or the best softball player comes back. That's a legitimate ambassador. Is there a pathway that the commission sees short of a complete unionized revenue share?
This is like a hot potato mic now. I think, thank you for your question. No, obviously that's, yeah, no, I mean, clearly that's the question of the day in terms of what a certain portion of college sports and schools is going to look like with regard to the arrangement with their athletes. I will say I just last week was at the University of Arizona sponsored event in DC that had a real focus on NIL collectives, and there were two takeaways I had from that event where the individual in charge of one NIL said, we need to be regulated. And then the second was, this is not sustainable, what we're doing. And I guess actually a third key one for me in terms of the takeaway was what appears to be happening with the way the practices and collectives frankly appear to be, because of the institutional involvement, Title IX appears to be triggered. And what we're hearing is that 90% of all the money flowing from collectives is going to male athletes. And so that's a huge concern if there are activities on the part of the institution that are triggering or that should trigger Title IX. And so, clearly moving forward, whether there is some type of different model that creates a different kind of flow, an NIL super license. I know some have looked at that kind of arrangement between the institutions and the athletes. That's an entirely different session, clearly to look at those issues. But I would just say there are a number of institutions that do not want that model, that do not have the same kind of money for that kind of model, and that are committed. The majority, I would say, of Division I institutions are committed to the traditional model that's in place. But again, we have an opportunity here this year to ensure that, again, there's appropriate alignment and to correct some of the misalignments of the past as it relates to the total pie. And so that, as you move forward and look at different models for different groups of schools, at least the solutions we're presenting are what's best for the whole. what's best for the whole of college sports, and not only including Division I, but you've got, 600, 700 Division II and III institutions that frankly will be helped by what we've presented as well, because it, more appropriately aligns the NCAA revenues, and the NCAA, of course, is responsible for all of those divisions.
I'd like to add a comment in response to Dan's question about how do we create change? If you think back in 2015, the academic incentives piece was added to revenue distribution. That's the first and only change that happened to revenue distribution. That happened with new money coming in through March Madness. The recommendations, one option, the second option that we offered to align the governance and the authority for CFP football, for FBS football, a totaled about $120 million total, right? For FBS football to be taken out of the formula for revenue distribution and to also cover their costs of what the NCAA is currently paying. 120 million out of 1.4 billion coming in, much like the academic incentives, maybe a good time to try to get those changes done, right? So that's just a minimum that, again, that's why this particular data set and only that one data point was really emphasized. That's staggering. 11 football coaches currently on 9 campuses, in 9 campuses right now. 11 football coaches are paid more than the total scholarship and medical benefits for athletes, all of their athletes on their campus. It's staggering numbers. So that's why we are highlighting those points to just kind of emphasize that. So we might close. I'm sorry.
It's context.
Yeah, just trying to put it all in context. So maybe the last question from Angie Allen at the Missouri Valley Conference. Have you presented this information and your solutions to the NCAA? And if so, what was their reaction?
Yeah, I would say we have at different times presented the solutions that we have. The data, one of the reactions that in a preliminary data set that we presented, the questions were more around, well, are you giving institutions all the credit? Because the original data set we didn't have the medical expenses in it. And so the question was, are you giving institutions proper credit for, other types of benefits beyond scholarships? So again, to be fair, we included medical expenses, premium, the insurance premiums. And so this is the most updated set of data. So we're currently working to, again, present this to as many board of directors members that we can, and to have those kinds of conversations. If you all can help us do that, we would appreciate it. And we appreciate having, the feedback. But I think, again, with the revenue distribution in terms of including gender equity in the revenue distribution, that's one as well that, I know that, again, the NCAA board has asked its committee to look at it. So again, we think the timing is right, as we understand it, in terms of, the process and the board authority to look at those kinds of things. Also just want to, again, reiterate, as we've said during our presentation, that, the data we presented here, a lot of it's focused on FBS and Power 5. And again, one of the main reasons is the opportunity ahead for everyone is dealing with the CFP money before it comes in. And the reality is 80% of that distribution goes to the Power 5. Those are the schools that really have the authority to make those decisions. And that's why we focused it in that way. And we know that, again, as Peter said, many of those schools are investing significant amounts of money in all their other sports, which is great. But again, we want to see, the incentives of the national structure really aligned with those principles in a way that can be defended. And we think that's going to be ultimately best for the collective good of the whole, as it looks to, defend the system in litigation, and then moving forward in terms of creating the best experiences for college athletes well into the future.
All right, I think we'll stop there. Do appreciate everyone's attendance and hopefully what you've heard today about the new revenue that's coming and the opportunities in front of us, you'll take this back to your campuses and your conferences and have a conversation about where things can go. So thank you very much. We will have a report about what you saw here, much more in depth, released probably in the next month or so. And you'll certainly get a copy of that through the Night Commission email list. So thank you very much for coming and hope you have a great afternoon.